It started with a sound, soft, deliberate, unmistakable. A scratch at the window. 16-year-old Maya Ellison froze in place, her heart thudding like a drumbeat in her ears. Was it a raccoon? A branch? A prank? She pulled back the curtain. And what she saw staring back at her would shatter everything she thought she knew about fear, loss, and connection. It wasn't human. But it wasn't wild either. And from that moment on, her life would never be the same. What was waiting outside her window was a calling. And it had claws. The scratch that broke the silence. The clock on Maya Ellison's nightstand blinked 1:43 a.m. in glaring red digits. Outside, the wind whispered through the ponderosa pines that loomed around her family's cabin, nestled on the outskirts of Flagstaff, Arizona. The world was still, blanketed in the kind of deep wooded silence that only came in the dead of night. Maya lay wide-eyed in bed, unable to sleep. The quiet wasn't comforting, it was loud in a different way. It pressed against her ears, too full of thoughts she didn't want to have. Her father's favorite hiking boots still sat in the corner, covered in dust. 8 months since the accident, and yet sometimes she swore she heard the gravel crunch under his footsteps. But tonight, it wasn't imagination that pulled her out of her thoughts. It was a sound. Scratch. Scratch. It came again, soft but deliberate, right against her bedroom window. Maya bolted upright, heart in her throat. Her room faced the trees, no sidewalk, no neighbor's yard, just forest. Maybe it was the wind or a loose tree branch tapping the glass. Still, her breath hitched as she slowly swung her legs over the edge of the bed. Scratch. Scratch. Again. She crossed the room, every step deliberate. The floorboards creaked beneath her bare feet. She grabbed her phone, flicked on the flashlight, and took one last breath before she pulled back the curtain. 2 glowing eyes stared back at her. Not human. Not a raccoon either. These eyes were golden, wide, and alert. They belonged to something feline and wild. A bobcat. Maya stood frozen. The animal didn't move, didn't flinch. It just stared through the glass like it had been searching for her. Not menacing, not feral. It wasn't snarling. In fact, it looked lost. Something about it held a stillness, a sadness. She didn't scream. Didn't call for her mom. She didn't even step back. The bobcat blinked once, turned, and disappeared into the trees, swallowed by moonlight and shadow. Maya's hand was trembling as she lowered the curtain. Her chest heaved with unspent words. She didn't know it yet, but that was the moment her grief stopped being silent. It had found its echo in the wild. Maya didn't sleep the rest of the night. She sat by the window, curtain slightly drawn, waiting for the bobcat to return. Her flashlight stayed within reach, its battery slowly draining, but she never turned it back on. She didn't need to see anything else. What she saw in those golden eyes wasn't just curiosity. It was something deeper, something she couldn't name. Fear? Maybe. Loneliness? Definitely. Recognition? That was what scared her most. The next morning, her mom didn't notice the dark circles under Maya's eyes. Olivia had just finished a 12-hour hospital shift and was running late for the next. Maya, there's cereal. Don't forget to lock the back door. I'll be home after 7. Then she was gone. Maya barely heard her. She went straight to the backyard, phone in hand, searching for any trace of what she'd seen. The earth beneath her window was soft with fallen pine needles and damp soil. Her heart jolted when she found the faint imprint, paw prints. 4-toed, round, and padded. Definitely feline. Definitely not imagined. She followed them a few feet toward the woods until they vanished in the underbrush. That was all she had. Just prints, a memory, and a strange heaviness in her chest that hadn't been there before. Or maybe it had, it just finally had somewhere to go. Back inside, she opened her sketchbook and began to draw what she remembered. A sleek body. Tufted ears. Thick tawny fur spotted like shadows on sunlit stone. The short tail, bobbed like a stub of punctuation. A North American bobcat. Her father used to say they were ghosts of the trees. Hard to spot. Harder to understand. But it hadn't felt like a ghost. It had felt real. Real enough to scratch at her window. Real enough to look her in the eye and tell her, without a word, that it had come for a reason. What reason, she didn't know. Yet, as she finished the sketch, something stirred in her. Not fear. Not confusion. Purpose. She whispered to herself, not fully understanding why, I have to find it again. Outside, the trees swayed quietly, holding their secrets close. Mourning and mystery. Maya Ellison wasn't the type of girl who liked to be seen. Not since her father's accident. She used to hike with him every Saturday morning without fail, rain or shine. He was a wildlife biologist for the Arizona Game and Fish Department. Always teaching, always pointing, that's a Cooper's hawk. Those tracks belong to a javelina. See that? Bobcat scat, 2 days old. She'd smile, pretend to be grossed out, but deep down she loved it. Now, those trails were empty. Her home on the edge of Flagstaff had always felt like a sanctuary, tucked against the Coconino National Forest, where pine needles carpeted the backyard and the night smelled like earth and wind. But lately, it just felt like walls. Her mother, Olivia, was there in the technical sense, physically present, emotionally vacant. Since her husband died during a solo hiking survey, Olivia had buried herself in double shifts at the local hospital. Maya barely saw her anymore. And when she did, they talked in fragments: groceries, curfews, school. Feelings didn't make the cut. Maya's bedroom, once decorated in art prints and fossil posters, now looked stripped down. A lone hiking boot sat under her desk. His. She never moved it. She didn't know why. Maybe because it was proof he'd once walked back through that door. Now she walked alone. She didn't have many friends. She didn't want them. The kids at school didn't understand what it was like to lose someone who shaped your world like a compass. Who made the trees feel alive, the dirt feel meaningful. To them, grief was something you posted about. To Maya, it was a language no one else seemed to speak. Every afternoon after school, she wandered into the forest behind the cabin. No trail. Just instinct. She never brought music. Just silence and her thoughts. Her father had taught her how to move through the woods without disturbing the wildlife. Now she used those skills to disappear, from people, from noise, from expectations. On this day, 3 mornings after the bobcat's appearance, she wandered farther than usual. She felt pulled, not aimless but guided. Like the trees were nudging her forward, gently parting to make room. Near a fallen pine stump, she knelt and ran her fingers over the dirt. There. Another paw print. Faint, but fresh. She wasn't imagining this. The bobcat had been here. Recently. Her pulse quickened. She should have been afraid. But instead, she felt something she hadn't felt in months. Awake. The forest had always been her father's realm. But now, something inside her whispered that maybe it was hers too. And maybe, just maybe, the wild wasn't trying to haunt her. Maybe it was trying to speak. The wind shifted as Maya stood up from the paw print, brushing dry pine needles from her jeans. A sudden breeze rustled the canopy, sending a soft whoosh through the pines that sounded almost like breathing. The scent of damp bark and cold earth filled her lungs. She looked around. Quiet. Still. But not empty. It was the feeling she always got right before spotting a deer or owl, an invisible hush, like the trees were holding their breath. Her father used to call it the forest's pause. A moment of mutual watching. She moved slowly, carefully, the way he had taught her. Roll from heel to toe, shift your weight like you're part of the ground, not a stranger to it. She passed by a boulder she remembered from a hike last summer, one her father had called a bobcat perch. The kind of spot where a feline could crouch silently for hours, observing without being seen. A faint trail of disturbed underbrush caught her attention, bent ferns, scuffed dirt. Following it, she made her way deeper into the woods until the familiar world behind her began to fade. No more fence lines, no faint hum of the road, just wilderness. She found the feather first. Small, gray, tipped in red. A flicker's wing? Maybe. Nearby, a patch of churned-up leaves held something else, a splash of dried blood, not fresh, but recent enough to hold color. Maya crouched, inspecting the area. Claw marks scratched the base of a rotting log. Not deep enough for a cougar. Too erratic for a fox. Her fingers traced the shape. It was feline. Was it injured? Hunting? Fleeing? The questions piled up, but so did the fascination. She wasn't afraid. If anything, the mystery pulled her deeper, like a story just beginning to unfold. She knew this wasn't normal bobcat behavior. They didn't linger near humans, let alone approach them. And yet, it had come to her window. And now, it seemed to be lingering. A few yards ahead, a broken sapling leaned at an odd angle, as if something heavy had brushed past. Beneath it, another paw print. This one clearer. 3 inches across, with the telltale roundness of a wildcat. Maya's heart beat faster. She wasn't chasing shadows anymore. This wasn't a dream or an echo of her father's stories. It was real. Something wild, wounded, and waiting was out there, and it had chosen her. As the wind whispered through the needles above, Maya whispered back, almost without thinking, "I'll find you." The forest didn't answer. But it didn't need to. She could feel it, something had begun. Trust without words. 3 days passed. Maya returned to the woods every evening after school, hoping for another sign, another print, a flicker of fur, those golden eyes peering through the underbrush. But nothing came. Her mother noticed the dirt on her shoes and the fading scratches on her arms, but said nothing. Olivia had given up asking questions she didn't really want the answers to. Then, on the 4th night, just as the sun melted into the horizon and shadows began to stretch across the backyard, Maya saw it. Movement near the fence line. She froze by the kitchen window, squinting through the dusk. There, standing half concealed by tall grass, was the bobcat. Same build. Same coat, tawny, dappled with faint black spots, the underbelly pale like desert sand. Its ears stood tall, black tufts sharp against the fading light. And that short, stubby tail flicked once, like a punctuation mark at the end of a sentence only the forest could write. But it wasn't just standing there. It was limping. Its front left leg touched the ground too lightly, too cautiously. It shifted its weight awkwardly, favoring the opposite side. Maya felt her breath hitch. Whatever it had survived in the forest hadn't left unscathed. She moved away from the window and grabbed the leftovers from the fridge, 2 slices of cold turkey, some rice from the night before. Then, without telling herself why, she opened the back door and stepped into the twilight. The bobcat didn't run. It watched her. She moved slowly, heart pounding but strangely calm, and placed the food at the edge of the grass, well beyond the fence. Then she backed away, returning to the steps of the porch, careful not to make eye contact. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then the bobcat took 1 step forward. Paused. Another. Then it limped to the food, sniffed cautiously, and began to eat, not like a ravenous stray, but with the focus and grace of a wild creature maintaining dignity, even in hunger. Maya didn't move. She barely breathed. After a few minutes, the bobcat stopped and looked directly at her. Its eyes glinted in the fading light, eyes too deep, too knowing. She whispered, "You came back." It blinked, slow and deliberate. And then it turned and disappeared into the trees. Maya didn't follow. She didn't need to. Something had shifted. A silent agreement had been made. That night, she couldn't sleep. Not from fear, but from awe. She began researching everything she could about bobcats. Size, typically 15 to 30 pounds. Height, around 2 feet at the shoulder. Solitary. Territorial. Avoid humans. And yet, this one hadn't. She kept the leftover turkey hidden in foil at the back of the fridge, just in case. And the next evening, the bobcat returned. Still limping. Still silent. She started calling him Cedar, not out loud, but in her thoughts. The name fit. Strong, quiet, rooted in wilderness. By the 3rd night, he was waiting before she even stepped outside. Cedar came every evening now. Always just as the sun slipped behind the peaks and shadows crept across the yard. He never approached the house, never crossed the invisible line of trust they'd drawn together, but he came. That alone felt like a miracle. Maya began sitting near the old oak stump at the edge of the woods, about 20 feet from where she left the food. No sudden movements, no talking. Just presence. It became their ritual. She'd sit with a book in her lap, her sketchpad open beside her. Cedar would limp forward from the trees, slow but steady, never looking directly at her until he was finished eating. Then he'd sit, just past the food bowl, tail curled tight around his paws, and watch her. Not in fear. Not in challenge. Just watching. One evening, she whispered, my dad used to sit right here. Cedar didn't move. She kept her voice low, like speaking to a baby bird. He taught me how to walk in the forest without making noise. How to read paw prints. How to tell if scat is fresh. A faint breeze rustled the pine needles above. He died last winter. Fell during a solo survey out by Bear Jaw Trail. They didn't find him until the snow started to melt. The lump in her throat returned, familiar but no longer suffocating. Cedar blinked slowly. She whispered, I think you've lost something too. She didn't need proof. The limp. The eyes. The quiet, deliberate way he moved. It wasn't just instinct. It was pain. Loss had its own shape, and she saw it in him like a reflection. Later that night, Maya flipped through her sketchbook and stopped at the page where she'd drawn Cedar. She sharpened the details now, his short tail, the faint scar beneath his eye, the curve of his paw as it lifted gently from the ground. Then, beneath the sketch, she wrote, Cedar, the wild doesn't always run away. Sometimes it finds you. Each night that passed, the distance between them grew shorter, not in feet, but in fear. She stopped bringing food after a week, worried about making him dependent. But Cedar still came. He didn't need the turkey anymore. He needed something else. Connection. One evening, she brought her father's old field journal to the stump. The cover was cracked leather, worn and creased. Inside were scribbled notes, sketches of elk tracks, and pressed leaves he'd collected with her when she was 10. She laid it beside her on the stump and opened it to a random page. Bobcats are rarely seen. Their survival depends on silence, distance, and trust. If one shows itself to you, it's not by accident. Her fingers trembled on the page. Across the yard, Cedar sat. Still. Present. Not an accident. Not fear. Something more. When he stood to leave, their eyes met for a long moment. Maya didn't speak. She didn't have to. That night, she dreamed of forests, not dark and menacing, but warm, breathing, alive. And somewhere within them, a girl and a bobcat walked together. Not side by side, but in the same direction. The breaking point. Maya heard the ATV before she saw it. The rumble echoed through the trees behind her house, jarring and out of place in the otherwise hushed afternoon. She was at her usual spot near the stump, scribbling in her notebook, when the engine cut out and a man's voice called sharply, "Hey, you back there?" She stood slowly, heart thudding. A tall man in worn denim and a camouflage jacket stepped through the underbrush, pushing a wide-brimmed hat from his forehead. His face was leathery and flushed, his mouth pulled into a hard, skeptical line. It was Mr. Holton, her neighbor from 3 parcels over. Retired bitter, and known for 2 things, his prized hunting trophies and his hatred of trespassers, animal or human. "What the hell are you doing out here alone?" he barked. "You know there's a bobcat prowling this area?" Maya stayed still. "I've seen it." His eyes narrowed. "Seen it?" "I caught it limping along the back fence last night. Mangy things too comfortable near homes. Probably diseased. Dangerous. I've already reported it." Her mouth went dry. Reported it? To who? Game and Fish. "And if they won't do something, I will. Traps go in tomorrow." "No." The word slipped out before she could stop it. Mr. Holton stiffened. "Excuse me." "You can't trap him," Maya said, voice shaking. "He's not hurting anyone." "You think this is a Disney movie," he snapped. "It's a wild animal. Wild means unpredictable. I've lost hens this month. Coyotes, bobcats, doesn't matter. If they cross into my property, they're done." He turned to leave, boots crunching on pine needles. "Tell your mother to keep you inside. Next time I see that cat, it won't walk away." That night, Maya sat at the dinner table, untouched plate in front of her. "Are you okay?" Olivia asked, glancing up from her phone. Maya hesitated, then said, "If a wild animal came to you for help, would you give it?" Olivia blinked, surprised. "Depends. If it needed it, and if it wasn't dangerous, maybe. Even if it broke the rules." Olivia sighed. Maya, what is this about? She couldn't say. Not yet. The next morning, Maya skipped breakfast and checked the woods. No cedar. Afternoon came. Still no sign. Then, near sunset, movement in the trees caught her eye. He limped out from the shadows, slower than before. But before Maya could approach, a sharp crack rang out in the distance. A gunshot. Cedar flinched and darted back into the trees. Maya dropped to her knees. The breaking point had come, not from the bobcat's claws or teeth, but from a world that saw wildness as a threat. And now, trust wouldn't be enough. She'd have to protect him, even if it meant standing between him and the rest of the world. The sky that night was wrong. Not just dark, but alive. Clouds boiled like smoke above the treetops, and the air smelled like something burning in the distance. Maya stood by her bedroom window, unease crawling under her skin. Thunder rolled low across the mountains like a warning. The weather app said it would pass. It didn't. By 9 p.m., lightning flashed jagged scars across the sky, turning the forest into a strobe-lit silhouette. Rain pelted the windows, and the wind howled with a voice of its own. That's when she heard it. A scream. Not human, but close. Animal. Raw and sharp and sudden, slicing through the roar of rain. Maya's heart slammed against her ribs. Cedar. She bolted down the hallway. Her mom was asleep on the couch, exhaustion pulling her under like quicksand. Maya didn't wake her. She grabbed a flashlight, her raincoat, and ran into the storm. The door slammed behind her with a bang. Cold needles of rain struck her skin as she sprinted across the yard and into the trees. The beam of her flashlight trembled with her grip, cutting narrow tunnels of light into the shadows. Another cry, closer this time, desperate. She called out instinctively, "Cedar." The name got lost in the wind, but something ahead rustled violently. She followed the sound, stumbling over roots and slipping in the mud. Her shoes were soaked, her lungs burning. Then she saw him. Cedar was lying beneath a fallen pine branch, thick with needles and bark. Lightning must have struck it, shards of wood lay scattered like bones. One of his back legs was pinned, and he was panting, his flanks heaving with pain. He didn't snarl or run. He didn't move at all. His golden eyes locked onto hers. She dropped to her knees beside him, mud seeping through her jeans. "Hey," she whispered, tears mixing with the rain. "I'm here." The branch was heavy, slick with sap. She braced her shoulder under it and pushed. Nothing. She repositioned, gritting her teeth, and shoved harder. It shifted. Cedar whimpered, but didn't lash out. She whispered soft reassurances she barely heard herself say. One last push, and the branch rolled free. Cedar pulled himself out, limping even worse now, collapsing into her lap. His head rested against her knee. He let her touch him. For the first time. Her shaking hands slid through his soaked fur. He was cold. Weak. But alive. The storm raged on, but Maya didn't move. She stayed with him in the rain, shielding him with her coat, whispering the only words she had left. "You're safe. I've got you." Far off in the distance, another crack of thunder split the air, but here, right here, it was quiet. No fear. No wild. Just trust, carved in the middle of a storm. When they finally limped back to the house an hour later, one girl, one broken bobcat, Maya knew something had changed. This was no longer just about a connection. It was about survival. And she wasn't letting him face it alone. A healing bond. The morning after the storm, Maya woke with her clothes still damp and mud streaked across her arms. Cedar was gone, but not far. She had watched him limp into the woods from her window just before sunrise, slow and cautious, pausing once to look back. She knew he couldn't survive another night like that. She had to help him heal. Behind the house, past the tree line where her mother never ventured, stood the old hunter's shack, an abandoned wooden structure with half a roof and walls weathered gray. Her dad had once used it to store gear. Now, it would serve a new purpose. A sanctuary. Maya spent the next 3 afternoons clearing it out. She patched the leaky corner with a tarp and stacked dry towels and blankets from the garage into a makeshift nest. A broken cooler became a food bin. She left a shallow bowl of water. Everything was done quietly, purposefully, with the same reverence her father used when bandaging an injured bird or easing a trapped squirrel from a net. On the fourth day, she waited. And Cedar came. He appeared at dusk, head low, legs still dragging slightly. He paused at the shack's entrance, nostrils flaring, eyes alert. But there was no food waiting this time, just stillness and the scent of someone who meant no harm. He stepped inside. Only for a minute. But it was enough. From then on, the shack became his shelter. Maya didn't try to touch him again. She sat outside, leaning against the wall, speaking softly through the open door. Stories. Observations. Memories of her father, some painful, some golden. Each evening, Cedar returned. Some nights, he curled inside. Others, he lingered at the edge of the trees, his silhouette visible only when the moonlight hit just right. Day by day, his limp began to fade. Maya brought her sketchbook one evening and began to draw him again. This time, stronger. Less shadowed. She noticed details she hadn't before, the faint M-shaped markings above his eyes, the missing patch of fur near his ribs, maybe from an old snare or scrape. He wasn't perfect. Neither was she. But they were healing. Together. And for the first time in months, Maya didn't feel like a girl trying to fill an empty house. She felt like someone who mattered. Someone a wild thing had chosen to trust. It was just past 6 a.m. when Maya crept out of the house, boots in hand, jacket zipped, moving like a whisper through the back door. The sun was still a promise on the horizon, painting faint orange ribbons across the sky. Dew clung to every blade of grass, and birds were only beginning to stir. Cedar had stayed in the shack overnight. She could feel it. With a thermos of warm broth tucked into her backpack, Maya stepped into the woods, following the now familiar trail to the shelter. She didn't notice the second pair of footsteps behind her. Not yet. When she reached the shack, Cedar was curled in the corner on the old blanket she'd layered with leaves. His ears perked slightly at her arrival, but he didn't bolt. Didn't growl. He simply blinked, slow and calm, as she approached and knelt beside the entrance. She unscrewed the thermos cap and poured the warm broth into a small metal bowl. "It's not turkey, I know," she whispered with a soft smile. "But you'll like it." Cedar sniffed, then lowered his head to lap at the broth. His tongue moved carefully, his movements still cautious but less rigid. His ribs no longer jutted sharply from his sides. His eyes no longer darted with every sound. He was healing. "Maya." The voice snapped through the morning like a branch underfoot. She spun around. Olivia stood 10 yards away, still in scrubs, sneakers wet with dew, eyes wide in disbelief. Her expression was unreadable, a blend of fear, confusion, and something deeper. "Oh." Maya froze, suddenly a child caught with her hand in a fire. I can explain," she stammered. But Olivia didn't speak. She stepped slowly forward, gaze fixed on the bobcat who was now standing, tense, ready to run, eyes locked on the new presence. "He's not dangerous," Maya said quickly, rising. "I didn't feed him after the first few nights. He's wild, Mom, but he's not what people think." Olivia took another step, slower this time. "And he's just stayed here?" Maya nodded. "He was hurt. I helped him. He helped me." Silence. "Then, I thought you were sneaking out to avoid me," Olivia whispered. "I was," Maya admitted. "But not to get away from you. To find something that felt alive again." Mother and daughter stood between trees and unspoken words. Olivia looked at Cedar, really looked, and saw not a predator, but a creature resting, surviving. Trusting. Then she turned to Maya. "We should call someone. Not animal control. Someone who can help him. Officially. Someone who'll listen." Maya's breath caught. "Really?" Olivia nodded. "But only if we do it together." And in that moment, something between them mended, not completely, but enough. Enough to begin again. Letting go, holding on. 3 weeks later, Cedar was running again. Not fast. Not without a slight hitch in his step. But the limp that once made him flinch at every movement had faded into a distant memory. His eyes gleamed brighter now, his coat fuller, cleaner. He looked less like a wounded stray, more like what he was always meant to be. Free. Maya stood beside Ranger Jessup at the edge of the forest clearing. He was a tall, no-nonsense wildlife officer with a gray beard and weathered hands who'd spent the last 20 years protecting Arizona's native animals. When Olivia had called the Regional Wildlife Rehabilitation Center, Jessup had been the one to answer. He hadn't laughed when Maya told him the story. He hadn't rolled his eyes when she said Cedar came to her. He'd just listened. Now, he clipped the last of the data tags onto a small tracking collar, designed to fall off after a few weeks. "It won't hurt him," Jessup said, sensing her hesitation. "And we won't follow unless absolutely necessary. This is just to make sure he adjusts. He's still wild." Maya nodded, trying to hide the ache behind her ribs. She knelt beside Cedar one last time, not close enough to touch, he wouldn't allow that, but close enough to meet his eyes. "You were never mine," she whispered, "but I'm so glad you found me." He stared back, unmoving. Then blinked once. Slowly, Jessup opened the gate. For a moment, Cedar hesitated. Then he stepped forward. Out of the clearing. Into the trees. And he didn't look back. Until he did. Halfway between shadow and sun, Cedar paused. Turned his head. His gaze met Maya's one last time. It lasted only a second. Then he vanished, swallowed by the forest that had always been his. Maya didn't cry. Not this time. Because this wasn't an ending. It was a release. Later that afternoon, Jessup handed Maya a small device that tracked Cedar's location. A simple GPS blip, nothing invasive. "He's headed north," he said, watching the screen. "Looks like he knows where he's going." Maya smiled. He always did. Olivia placed a hand on her shoulder. No words, just warmth. Just presence. Maya looked out toward the trees, wind moving through the branches like breath. Somewhere out there, a bobcat was running. And so was she. Not away, but forward. Fall crept back into the woods, quiet and golden. The mornings grew crisper. The pines whispered more softly, as if the forest itself was resting. But for the first time in nearly a year, Maya didn't feel the weight of that silence pressing down on her. Instead, she felt it lifting, like a breath exhaled after being held too long. She still walked the woods every day. Not searching now, but simply moving, present in a space that had once swallowed her grief. Now, it felt like home again. Cedar hadn't returned, not to the shack, not to the fence line. But she still tracked him through the tiny GPS beacon clipped to his collar. Every few days, a new blip would light up, somewhere deeper into the Coconino, always moving, always wild. She smiled each time she checked it. It was enough to know he was out there. Back at home, the shack had become something else. Not a shelter, not a hiding place, but a quiet memorial. She left it standing, added a new tarp to the roof, placed her father's old journal on the shelf inside. Sometimes she'd sit there and sketch. Not just cedar now, she drew owls, elk, foxes. The world he'd reconnected her to. And herself. She'd applied for a volunteer position at the local wildlife rescue center in Flagstaff. They called a week later. Offered her weekends. Her mom drove her to the first shift. They didn't talk much on the way. But when Olivia pulled into the gravel lot, she reached out and squeezed Maya's hand. "You brought him back to the wild," she said softly. "And somehow, I think he brought you back too." Maya nodded, throat tight. The center was small but busy. Her first task was cleaning kennels. It didn't matter. She wore the gloves, smiled at the injured hawk in recovery, and felt, for the first time since her father's death, that she belonged somewhere. That night, back in her room, Maya opened her journal and began to write. Cedar was never meant to stay. He was a guest in my grief, a mirror I didn't know I needed. He didn't come to be saved. He came to remind me what still lived inside me. Strength. Stillness. Wildness. She paused, then added. Some animals don't need to speak to be heard. And some people don't need to be whole to start again. Outside, the forest stood quiet and endless. And somewhere out there, a bobcat ran free. Just like the girl who had finally remembered how to.